It's not there yet.
No, I was just
I don't know how many people are supposed to be and they're supposed to be back after the test or back after. So you know, I've let them not start serving anything until
That's a good idea.
so hopefully they won't suddenly start bringing food out when they're so hot. But just in case, I wonder
Look what I was just Google image searching.
I've seen this.
Oh yeah, that's fine. Oh yeah, shoot. That's good. You're very good at that.
Hi everyone.
I almost got it.
Polar bears?
Almost got it.
Polar bears
Did you say not to come down with someone? Try to go from there.
Good evening. Good evening.
Bye, Sean.
Hello. Thank you, Dave. The answer is yes, you need a pen. There was a question going around of whether you're going to need a pen for the little paper that you have, the note cards you have, and yes, you will need a pen. Welcome to the beginning of the end of the first day of Digital Pedagogy Lab. I hope everyone's had a really good day today. I've heard good things, so hopefully that is good. We're here to enjoy what I'm anticipating to be, and I'm looking at the slides right now.
Eyes up, Sean. Eyes up.
Eyes up. Eyes up. Okay. Yes. This is so. I'm really pleased to introduce our keynote tonight. And I've written a little introduction. I like writing introductions. They're fun. This morning in the writing workshop, I had everyone write an introduction that was themselves from someone else's perspective, and it was really interesting to see what that was like. So I like doing this because then people get to see what I think of them. That sounded way more sinister than I thought it was going to be. Before there was Rajiv Jhangiani, the idea of open education always made me grumbly. I had such a problem with the idea of an open approach to education that looked like a digital textbook thrown on top of the usual rubrics and assessments, and didn't also include ideas of access, agency, belongingness, and the rest. But then I heard Rajiv present at the Open Ed conference a few years ago with Robin DeRosa, and he rocked the conference with a challenging and progressive interpretation of open education and pedagogy, one I hadn't heard before. He made me see something I had never seen before in the open movement, and I immediately knew I had a lot to learn from him. But that's just his conference-y academic side. Rajiv also embodies open in a very real way, with kindness, generosity of spirit, honest, clear listening, patience. He called me friend before we knew each other really at all, and I didn't doubt for a minute that he meant it. Rajiv cared for education, for students, for teachers, for anyone involved in this long, strange experiment of higher education is apparent, obvious, and immediate. And it was only through Rajiv's inspired assistance that Digital Pedagogy Lab was able to hold an event in Canada in response to Donald Trump's Muslim ban. With his help, we kept this event welcoming to all. Formally speaking, Rajiv is a special advisor to the provost on open education and a psychology instructor at Kwantlen Polytechnic University in British Columbia, where he conducts research in open education and the scholarship of teaching and learning. A recipient of the Robert E. Knox Master Teacher Award from the University of British Columbia and the Dean of Arts Teaching Excellence Award at KPU, Rajiv also serves as a co-director of the Open Pedagogy Notebook, an associate editor of Psychology, Learning, and Teaching, and an ambassador for the Center for Open Science. Formerly an open education advisor at BC Campus and a faculty workshop facilitators with the Open Textbook Network, his most recent book is Open, the philosophy and practices that are revolutionizing education and science. Please welcome Dr. Rajiv Jhangiani.
You expect me to speak after you made me emotional? Well, this is really a treat, I have to say, and thank you very, very much, Sean. Good afternoon, everyone. Yay! I love I've got my cheering squad at the back. Or maybe at the front. So I have to say, I really appreciate that DPL Toronto began with a land acknowledgement. I will reciprocate by saying that I work at Kwantlen Polytechnic University, which is located on the unceded, traditional, and ancestral territories of the Kwantlen, Musqueam, Katzie, Semiahmoo, Tsawwassen, Kikade, and Coquitlam peoples. I live in North Vancouver on the unceded, traditional, and ancestral lands of the Squamish First Nation. There's beautiful Kwantlen. You could probably actually look, the second floor of the library building is where my office is, and this is gorgeous, gorgeous North Vancouver. When I was seconded to BC Campus a couple of years ago to serve as their open education advisor, we went through a collective exercise. This was led by a wonderful colleague at Camosun College whose name is Diane Bin. And this was about understanding the history of the land on which we live and work. Diane, by the way, helped lead BC Campus's indigenization project, which has published a series of guides for post-secondary institutions. But the collective exercise that Diane led was really incredibly revealing for me personally. For example, through my research, I learned that the first Europeans, led by Captain George Vancouver, were met at the mouth of the Capilano River on June 13, 1792. And as you can see, it's a really beautiful place. There's a traditional Coast Salish saying, which is that when the tide goes out, the table is set. By 1873, Moodyville, as North Vancouver was known at the time, was a thriving community with a hotel and the inlet's first school. And in 1908, Chief Joe Capilano led a delegation of Coast Salish leaders on a journey to undertake talks with Prime Minister Wilfrid Laurier to discuss land claims, fishing and hunting rights, and education. But in the course of my research, I also learned that my home is about 5 minutes away from the present-day site of St. Thomas Aquinas Secondary School, which until 1959 was a residential school. But you wouldn't know this if you visited the school's website. This is its history page. It reads, "The Sisters of the Child Jesus arrived in British Columbia in 1898 with a desire to do missionary work with the First Nations people of the North Shore. In 1957, after a half-century of teaching involvement in the area, the sisters were approached to support the establishment of a Catholic high school on the North Shore." What about between 1898 and 1959? So in case you're not aware of it, native-land.ca is a really great resource. It doesn't represent official or legal boundaries of any indigenous nations, and it is a work in progress, but it is a wonderful resource if you're looking to get started with finding out about the land in which you reside and work. Understanding the history of this place, I think, is vital, but it's also critical that I think we not use land acknowledgements and learning about our history as some kind of balm over the gaping wounds of the present. 3 national headlines from just the last month. First, the Chilcotin First Nation had appealed a ruling that upheld the approval of an exploratory drilling program on their land near Williams Lake, BC, but the BC Court of Appeal has now rejected that appeal. Second, a $3.05 billion class action lawsuit has been filed against the federal government of Canada for discriminating against First Nations children by systematically underfunding on-reserve child welfare services. And third, this one points to how First Nations women have been effectively punished for marrying non-status men by having their own status taken away from them, and as a result also from their children. On January 11th of this year, the United Nations Human Rights Committee warned Canada that we have 180 days to stop this discriminatory practice and to come up with a solution. Some of you may have also read this recent thread on Twitter by Dr. Debbie Rees. She provides advice, excellent advice, about how we do and how perhaps we ought to use land acknowledgements. She tweeted, "At first glance, cool, right? Progressive-minded, right? They have a lot of appeal for sure, but that is where they can go wrong. If you do one because you think you should, but that's as far as you go with it in your own thinking or what you impart to others, you're just doing it as a box-checked sort of thing that is no good. If you're not mindful of what you're doing, then you are turning a land acknowledgement into a token. It becomes an empty gesture to honor Native people. It becomes this century's mascot." One of the things Debbie recommends doing during a land acknowledgement is going much deeper, by doing research, of course, but even deeper, including by recommending, for example, a book by a Native writer. Today I'm following her advice, and I'm recommending a collection of stories and songs from Mississauga Nishnabeg storyteller and writer Leanne Betasamasek Simpson. It is called "This Accident of Being Lost." Let me just pull up my copy because I'm going to read you an excerpt from this astonishing work. "Lucy, Quay, and I walked through the neighborhood last fall when all the trees looked like the time Nanabush hid his kokum in there, like the maples were being swallowed by flame arms of red and orange. We marked each one with a spray-painted purple thunderbird so that when their leaves were gone, we would know which ones were the sugar maples the following spring. Really, we should be able to tell by looking at the bark and the way the branches hold themselves, but we're still too new at it. Quay was so pregnant, I made her stand back from the paint fumes. Lucy made a stencil so the thunderbird would look like a thunderbird and not the death mark the city puts on trees when they're about to cut them down for safety reasons. Now it's March and we have 30 tin buckets, 30 new spigots, tobacco, a drill with 2 charged batteries, a 3/8 of an inch drill bit, and 30 flyers. The neighborhood we're going into mostly votes NDP or Liberal in the provincial and federal elections, and they feel relief when they do. They have perennials instead of grass. They get organic, local vegetables delivered to their doors twice weekly, in addition to going to the farmer's market on Saturday. They're also trying to make our neighborhood into an Ontario Heritage designation. I think that mostly means that you can't do renovations that make your house look like it isn't from the 1800s, or rent your extra floors to the lower class. We know how to do this, so they'll be into it. Hand out flyers first, have a community meeting, ask permission, listen to their paternalistic bullshit and feedback. Let them have influence. Let them bask in the plight of the native people so they can feel self-righteous. Make them feel better, and when reconciliation comes up at the next dinner party, they can hold us up as the solution and brag to their real friends about our plight. I proofread the flyer one more time, because everybody knows white people hate typos. This accident of being lost is published by House of Anasi Press, and I do recommend that you buy it. I can't tell you how thrilled, nervous, excited I am to be with you today in this incredible location, full of a lot of character, full of a lot of history, but especially among this nurturing community, among friends. Some of you know me from my work in open education, but that actually is not going to be the focus of my talk this evening. In fact, I'm going to try something quite different, quite personal, quite experimental. I'm stepping outside of my comfort zone in at least 3 ways. I'm going to make some noise, and I hope you like it. I have to warn you, I'm quite new to this, but we'll give it a shot. Hello, lightness, my old friend. I've come to be with you again, because a vision softly creeping left its seeds while I was sleeping, and the vision that was planted in my brain still remains within the sound of violence. In adjunct life I taught alone, a second-class citizen, just a clone, beneath the halo of a teaching prize that was tweeted to my surprise, when my heart was stabbed by the pride of the ivory tower that makes us cower and touches the sound of violence. And in the naked light I saw 10,000 adjuncts, maybe more, people teaching without earning, a sector keeping without respecting, people fighting wrongs that voices never shared, and no one dared disturb the sound of violence. Fool said I, you do not know, violence like a cancer grows. Hear their words so they might reach you, sing their arms so they might eat you, but my words like silent raindrops fell and echoed in the wells of violence, and the tenured bowed and prayed to ungodly ways they made. signs say the words of your contract were written on this classroom walls and tenement walls, and whispered in the sound of violence, the sound of silence, the sound of violence. Thank you, my goodness. You're letting me give out all kinds of dreams. Captive audience. So, as you can probably tell, I really love that instrument. I picked it up 2 years ago, and I've been muddling my way through since. I began actually by watching some really wonderful teachers on YouTube. Cynthia Lin, I have to say, is one of my favorites. And then I took a couple of classes at a school in Vancouver called Rudy's Ukes. It was a really, really interesting mix, I have to say. When you go to ukulele class, big mix. So a lot of seniors, a few young adults, great mix. And we played, we built our skills together, we assisted one another. We did more together than we could have done individually. And we sang. My God, we sang. It wasn't a singing class, right? But it may as well have been. And I'm sharing all of this because this is really interesting to me as an educator. Because I want my students to do more with each other than they can do individually. I want them to be able to follow their passions even independently. I want them to be surprised by how many skills they develop. And I want them to experience joy. But none of these things happen, I think, unless they step outside of their comfort zone. But there's a paradox over here. Because as educators, as much as we want our students to step outside of their comfort zones, I think we hope for this, as we are often happily ensconced, wrapped, enveloped, insulated, protected within our own comfort zones. Comfort zones that may comprise of our favorite stories, activities, readings, assignments, policies, even disciplines. And I don't mean to suggest that this is necessarily a bad thing. I used to be a dancer, and so I know I was able to perform well extemporaneously only when I had a solid foundation and strong technique. And so I think the stories, activities, readings, assignments, and disciplines that we experienced as our own training wheels came off provide us with that foundation. And of course we refine and tweak these as we go, as we experience more teaching. But the real jumps, I think, in our ability occur when we depart from the familiar, when we respond to the music in the room, the melodies of curiosity, the chorus of different experiences. I should have been in Sean's workshop. I could use some polishing there. But the real transformation occurs when we try something new, something that may even make us feel nervous. Even when that thing could fall flat on its face, when we risk feeling embarrassed or judged by our peers and our students. But this is exactly where growth occurs, where the magic occurs, out of our comfort zones, out in the open. I think, well, actually I'm going to share this anyway. Earlier today, I was in Amy Collier's incredible track on inclusive design, and she gave us about 4 minutes to write something, free writing, in response to the stem, I am here. In the same spirit of openness, I'm going to share what I wrote. I'm so privileged to be here. I used to swim inside a pool that had demarcated lanes. It was a lovely pool, and I was thrilled to have been able to secure membership in the pool center. It had a long wait list and not many brown bodies in the water. But then some friends pointed to the window, and I noticed the ocean. This is where I now live. I often feel out of my depth over here, but the voice inside me mostly works as a rickety lighthouse, keeping me away from the rocks. My soul feels at home here, and I'm waving to those who are in the pool, just in case they happen to look out the window. Thank you, Amy, for that. I think this is one of the reasons I'm drawn to open pedagogy. It's not just our students who benefit from working in the open, it's also us. But liberating as open pedagogy can be, it also can be terrifying because it removes the cloak of the classroom. And it is such a comfortable cloak for faculty. Because I think if you're like me and you suffer from imposter syndrome, we think it protects us from being found out. And if we suffer from the Dunning-Kruger effect, as some do, we think it protects us from our secret source being stolen. But talking about magics and secrets and cloaks and classrooms, I'm going to actually pause for a minute and show you a brief scene from a movie that you may have seen. Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix. Take a look.
Good morning, children. Ordinary wizarding level examinations. OWLs, more commonly known as owls. Study hard and you will be rewarded. Fail to do so and the consequences may be severe. Your previous instruction in this subject has been disturbingly uneven, but you'll be pleased to know from now on you will be following a carefully structured, ministry-approved course of defensive magic. Yes.
There's nothing in here about using defensive spells.
Using spells? Well, I can't imagine why you need to use spells in my classroom.
We're not going to use magic.
You will be learning about defensive spells in a secure, risk-free way.
What use is that? If we're going to be attacked, it won't be risk-free.
Students will raise their hands when they speak in my class. It is the view of the ministry that a theoretical knowledge will be sufficient to get you through your examinations, which after all is what school is all about.
There's a few things to unpack there. On the plus side, I have to say, at least she's ensuring all of the students in her class have access to textbooks. So there's that. But Dolores Umbridge, right, one of the most despised characters in the Harry Potter universe, walking in, noticed that the students were happy, chattering, playing, in fact, collaborating in a game that actually exercised some of their practical skills. She walks in, ignites the paper bird that's being flown around, and proceeds to impose her sense of order and discipline. Theoretical knowledge only, no practical application. Quite fascinating. What comes next is even more fun. She goes on to wrap the blackboard, which results in the words course aims appearing on the board. Number 1, understanding the principles underlying defensive magic. Number 2, learning to recognize situations in which defensive magic can be legally used. And 3, placing the use of defensive magic in a context for practical use. Don't know about you, but to me it really makes sense that one of the most despised characters in the Harry Potter universe is obsessed with learning outcomes. I also have to credit my 7-year-old with this. We've been reading this book recently, and when I read that page, I was like, oh my god. So, are you ready to step outside of your comfort zones just a little bit? So, what I'd like you to do is take the index card that was handed out. Grab something to write with, pen, pencil, really doesn't matter. And what we're going to do now is we're going to draw. I see Julia smiling. We're going to draw not some elaborate thing, we're going to draw an icon. And I'll explain what I mean. I'm talking about a very simple representation of an idea. The idea we're drawing is the notion I said earlier, which is that we grow more when we step outside of our comfort zones. You're also only going to have 30 seconds to do it. And the good news is that ensures that everybody, in fact, has permission to draw as poorly as you want to. I fully welcome and encourage stick figures and simple shapes, and I'm going to model how I did this the first time I challenged myself to do this last week. So this is my 30 or 26-second version of this idea of going from a comfortable place to a less comfortable place, where I experience more growth. So again, an icon is just something simple to represent an idea. We're not talking about some elaborate scene. And 26 seconds. There we go. Now I know, Julia clearly looks excited, and if you don't know Julia Forsyth, she's one of my heroes. Julia works at Brock. She is legend. You have to follow her work. But I have to say, you don't have to have a skill set like Julia's to be able to perform this. Right? Clearly, very clearly. So 30 seconds, again, you've got the idea, growth, when you step outside of your comfort zones, your time starts now. And that's time. Well, you can keep going if you want, really, but you don't need to go any further. And good news is nobody else is going to see this. This is just for you. So thank you for doing that, and I know I didn't give you much choice, but I think that's the thing. When we step outside of our comfort zones, sometimes it's because we have to, and we don't really have choice. I also really wanted to pick something for you to do, at least as a first step, that most people, or many people, feel uncomfortable with, drawing. And that's because I think I want us to understand and remember what it feels like when our students are constantly, weekly asked to do things they've never done before. Remember that feeling in the pit of your stomach. Okay, let's go more personal now. Some of you know that I grew up in India, in a small town of about 25 million people called Bombay. I was blessed with a really loving family. What you're seeing is a picture of my mother holding me with my sister standing to her side. I was especially close to my maternal grandparents. I would guess that this photograph was taken on my 10th birthday. Feeding some birthday cake to my grandfather, you can see that I'm proudly rocking my yellow suspenders and really enjoying the fact that for my 10th birthday, my present was my own Walkman. This was a really big deal. This would be a big deal for any kid. So what I'm trying to alert you is that I led a life of significant privilege. We had staff in our home who would look after my every whim. And I'm not kidding. If I came home late one night from dance rehearsal and I was hungry or thirsty, I would literally go to a bell. There's a bell in every room. And I would ring the bell and somebody would appear and ask me what I wanted prepared for myself. It really sounds ridiculous right now, but this was normal for me growing up. And it was probably as comfortable as comfort zones get, I think. But then things changed. My family suffered a series of financial setbacks. We lost our home, lost the family business, and my father died. And the future that at one point was quite certain became desperately unsure virtually overnight. And that's why my maternal grandparents took me in. They gave me a home, and years later, they were the ones who supported my decision to move to Canada to pursue a higher education. This was taken just before I left. Some of you know that this is one of the reasons why when I moved here as an international student, I was so motivated to do well, because I knew that every semester that I made one of these letters, every semester I made one of the dean's lists, these letters would make their way back to India, to my grandparents. And if it were not for them, I wouldn't be here. This was taken a year and a half later. By this time, I was a permanent resident of Canada. I'd found one of the very few jobs on campus that were available to me, and I started to be able to pay my own tuition. So they came over to visit. It was summer in Vancouver, which, as many of you will know, is just insanely, breathtakingly beautiful. And we spent 3 weeks together. They went on to the US, where my grandfather's brother still lives. But then, instead of spending 3 weeks over there, my grandmother decided she wanted to cut short the trip early. She wanted to go back home. So they did. They flew back to India. And 7 days after landing in Bombay, my grandmother passed away. And 10 days after that, my grandfather passed away. And I know this sounds like a sad story, but it's actually a bittersweet story in a sense. So on the one hand, this is a couple that had been married for more than 50 years. So this is not unusual for them to pass in that proximity. And I think what is unusual is a couple of things. One, well, that I got to experience that degree of closure with someone who changed my life, effectively. That's something I'll always be grateful for. But also because I'm acutely aware that if it were not for their investment in me, I wouldn't have moved to Canada. I would not have become a Canadian citizen. I would not have become a university professor, and I certainly wouldn't be here. This is also one of the reasons why I care so much about equitable access to education. When I talk about higher education being transformative in terms of economic, social mobility, and more, this is not a theoretical concept to me. This is very much my lived experience. But even when I got here, I have to say it wasn't all smooth sailing. Before I left India, I took an exam. Some of you may be familiar with an English exam called the TOEFL, the Test of English as a Foreign Language. So I took that, which is hilarious because English is actually my first language. Not a sign privilege. So anyway, brilliant scores. Anyway, the colleges I was applying to required it, so I took it, I aced it, it was fine. But then before I registered for my classes, I was also asked to complete the college's own English diagnostic test. Fine, I thought, one more expensive hoop, and it really was expensive. Systems in higher education, I realized at the time, are not really designed for individual differences. And so although I didn't fit the stereotype of the wealthy international student, I didn't have a choice, so I registered. On the day of the test, I went to take the bus to the college, and I made a fatal mistake. You see, in India, when a bus takes you from point A to point B, it has a certain number. When it goes back from point B to point A, it has a different number. So I took the right number bus heading in the wrong direction. And by the time I realized, if you know Vancouver, I was heading to the college, and I was literally walking off the bus, and I was stepping onto the Lionsgate Bridge, and I'm thinking, this really doesn't look like the university. It wasn't. So I missed my scheduled test, and the next available test was 1 week later, which meant that I missed my early registration date. And so by the time I could register for my courses, all of the courses in my desired program that I'd moved halfway around the world to register in were full. All of them. Not a single course was available. Right. So imagine that. And so I was sitting over there looking probably quite despondent when an advisor suggested I take a psychology course. And I said, sure. But sometimes I wonder, what if she had not said psychology? What if she had said, pottery? What if you don't know? So that's necessary, but that's not sufficient, clearly. So when I came here, when I talk about the program of study, this is what I was doing. I came with the intent to pursue my passion, which was dance. It was more than my passion. I've been a member of a professional dance company for many years in India, performing in dance shows, musical theatre, music videos, and even Bollywood movies you've seen in there. I taught dance to children as young as 4 and as old as 64. Bottom left, this is fun. There's a photo of me with some of my students. Incidentally, my assistant seated to the left of me, smiling widely in the center of the picture. Some of you may recognize, he went on to become a major Bollywood star. So close. Anyway, it was hard work. I love the lifestyle of a dancer because it's long hours, it's constantly training, you're working to improve, but it was joyous because I think dance is really about connecting with others. At its best, it's an inspiring, transformative storytelling experience. And so that morning at the registration desk, I was contemplating leaving aside all of those dreams. But then something magical happened. During my very first semester as a student in Canada, I encountered an instructor who cared. His name is Michael McNeil. Michael knew that I was far from home. He noticed that despite the fact that I was doing well in classes, I was quiet, I was shy. He reached out, he asked how I was getting on outside of school. He asked me to stay after class to chat. And it really sounds incredibly simple, but it was everything to me. I was lonely, I was terrified of messing up. And I have to tell you, one thing I really remember is how embarrassing it was, and how embarrassing it is when you constantly have to ask for help with things. How to photocopy articles at the library. Again, in India, there's a guy for the photocopy machine. There's a guy for everything. Cheap, surplus labor everywhere. So you never touch the machine. I'm really confused about how you work this. And those ridiculously confusing rotating combination locks. This is not a thing where I grew up. I was struggling away, so I didn't get a locker because I was petrified of how to operate the locks. So anyway, Michael cared, he advised me, and a year later, when my mother moved to Canada, he and his wife even bought a painting from her. She is an incredible artist, by the way. You can check out her work at shakun.ca. But I will say, what Michael did, I felt was really above and beyond, because these gestures, this care, helped me find my own feet. And I still remember there was a day at the end of that first semester, I was waiting for the bus stop to go home in the correct direction, and I prayed probably as sincerely as I've ever prayed in my life. I prayed that I'd be given the opportunity to do for other students what Michael did for me. That was the moment, the end of my first semester in this country, that I realized I want to be a university professor. It changed my life. But this experience also taught me something else, that compassion is an exceptional, radical act. That empathy doesn't come from systems that aim for equality. Empathy comes from individuals who value equity. And that's why even with a little bit of compassion, you can transform someone's life. I'm going to pause over here for a while, because now you're going to flip your index card over, and we're going to draw another icon, this time representing this idea. You ready? 30 seconds starts now. Okay. Thank you again. I won't be troubling you with any more drawing. So you can relax now. Might be troubling you about something else though. So, more storytelling. As a graduate student, my teaching assistantships, I should say, mattered to me as much as my research assistantships, which I realized as a research-intensive institution was actually quite an odd thing. I recall one of my peers' graduate advisors was quite explicit about how he tried to shield his students from any teaching duties, which was weird, and at the time it even horrified me because I was thinking, this is the future professoriate. But I looked for teaching opportunities, and happily I found not just opportunities, but wonderful, generous, kind mentors. I especially want to single out Daniel Perlman on the left, who at the time was a faculty member in family studies at the University of British Columbia. He's now at UNC Greensboro, so among the kindest people I have ever met. And on the right, Andrea Perino, long-time adjunct faculty member at the University of British Columbia, who's among the most dynamic instructors I have ever met. These two individuals reaffirmed for me my love of teaching, and they've really played a massive role in my approach. My own graduate advisor, bless him, was immensely supportive, eventually, of my decision to focus on teaching and learning in my career instead of pure research, but he took a little while to come around. I recall him telling me early on that he wanted me to fly as far as my academic wings would take me. That was his expression. And I'm pretty sure he was thinking about Ivy League schools in the United States. But I have to say I'm very happy that they flew me to Toronto. As you can probably tell, my earlier rewriting of Simon and Garfunkel's Sound of Silence was based on some of my own experiences as an adjunct faculty member. There are many things I observed during that time. And I especially remember one semester when I was teaching at 3 institutions on the same day. They were very tiring days, and we didn't even have children then. But I think if you've been an adjunct faculty member, or you are an adjunct faculty member, you know that this is an absolutely atrocious way to make a living. You are not the professoriate, you are the precariat. You are poorly paid despite working more hours than a full-time job. You earn no benefits. You're often treated like a second-class citizen. And I'm not kidding. A couple of years ago, I visited a university in Ohio called Youngstown State University. And in just a few weeks before I visited, I read this article published in Inside Higher Education.
Yeah, that's where I work.
Yeah? I'm so sorry.
Yeah, I know, but I love the students.
This is the thing. And this is students who need to be served. So no pay raise in 25 years. But they, let them have cake. Or actually, no, they had to buy their own cake. So they didn't even get their own, celebratory cake. So this, I think, is an extreme example. But there are many paradoxes in this situation. You're expected to serve, but you're sometimes not invited to department meetings. You're given the classes with the most students, but you receive the least support. You experience joy in the classroom and an absence of joy in the department. If you're given an office, it's often called a hotel office because it's like a revolving door of adjunct faculty members. You can check out anytime you like, and you can leave, and you will not be missed. So imagine my surprise when, as an adjunct faculty member, one day I saw a tweet and a post on Facebook informing me that I was one of 2 winners of the prestigious sounding Robert E. Knox Master Teacher Award. Now this is curious to me because there was no email to me, there was no letter, there was no ceremony, there was no certificate. There was a post and a tweet. And I have to say, I felt a bit lucky still because, well, several reasons. One is because they had only recently begun acknowledging adjunct faculty members with this kind of award, which is itself is perhaps unusual. And this did mean the world to me because ultimately I was nominated by my students and this was adjudged by a committee of peers. But I think the way in which I learned about this underscored the very strange disconnect that I'd been feeling all the time from when I was a graduate student seeking out teaching assistantships. At the same time, I have to say now looking at this, change is possible, culture change is possible. And very soon after I left that institution to take up a teaching job at Quantlin, they really revolutionized how they were training graduate students looking for teaching opportunities and training opportunities. And now, in fact, at the University of British Columbia, we have a magnificent team in their Center for Teaching and Learning led by the amazing open educator, Christina Hendricks. So I have to say, this all gives me hope. Things can change. So this is my next observation based on all of this, which is that I learned early on that if I love teaching in some way, in many ways, I need to battle the academy. And I'm saying this in part because when I think about my own experiences, the experiences of people like our colleague at Youngstown State, this is a struggle because we are there first and foremost for our students. But the incentive structures are not. Audrey Waters is one of my heroes, and some of you will know that her motto is be less pigeon. And that's exactly what you have to do, I think, if you love teaching. You have to ignore the incentive structures that have you tapping at a food dispenser in a cage. One more publication, one more food pellet. One more grant, one more food pellet. And so we get more and more comfortable inside a cage. And eventually we forget how to fly, and we teach our young that their wings are unnecessary appendages. We shield them from flight. And so our young grow up, eventually, maybe, perhaps, 2% of them will secure a tenure track position somewhere. And then they will, of course, look to buy themselves out of teaching when they become full professors. And so the system replicates itself unless you resist. How do you resist? Well, Toni Morrison has ideas. She says, when you get these jobs that you've been so brilliantly trained for, just remember that your real job is that if you are free, you need to free somebody else. If you have some power, then your job is to empower somebody else. And resistance takes many, many different forms. It can look like being flexible with deadlines when you know how much your students are balancing. Again, tweet from the last week, Michelle Penkansky-Brock. I was traveling a lot because of family issues. I had an injury. I was falling behind, and my online instructor gave me more time. It meant the world. We know this. Resistance can look like waiving prerequisites for courses when you know that prerequisites are often unnecessary and even counterproductive. It can look like not giving exams based on multiple choice questions drawn from question banks supplied by commercial publishers. I'm really restraining myself on that front this evening. It can look like diversifying your syllabus, your readings. It can look like using an open textbook and using the permissions of an open license to change the names of the examples of the text to reflect the diversity of your classroom. It can look like not assigning grades. Thank you, Jesse. It can look like refusing to use Turnitin.com. Thank you, Sean. Thank you, Jesse. It can look like not shaming your students on Twitter over the last 2 weeks for not using a bleeding stapler. What the hell is wrong with you people? It can look like writing letters of recommendation based on potential instead of accomplishment, so that it is not just those with cookie crumbs already surrounding their mouths who are offered more cookies. It can look like designing renewable assignments and other forms of open pedagogy. It can look like co-creating course policies with your students. It can look like compassion. It can look like compassion. But compassion requires the kind of empathy that you're seeing in this tweet from Melissa Missy Beers from Ohio State University. Sorry, the Ohio State University. She tweeted, I just got an extension to submit something that was due at work tomorrow. The relief I felt was immediate and incredible. I actually felt the weight come off my shoulders. Reminds me of what it must be like, what it must feel like when students ask us for help and get an accommodation. It requires this kind of empathy, this kind of perspective taking. But as I'm talking about resistance, of course, Resistance carries a greater penalty for some than others. So I'm going to talk about what it's like. It's an interesting and challenging situation to enter academia as a person of color. For one, I think you're constantly reminded that you don't belong. When it came to my background, when I began teaching, I adjusted my accent when I was at work. Even now, they're cutting me off. It's the microwave. It's hard to get over that. When it came to my background, I adjusted my accent when I was at work, initially quite consciously, and then over time less consciously. Every time a colleague remarked at how good my English was, I smiled and I confirmed that English was my first language. Other colleagues would presume to shorten my name from Rajiv to Raj, presumably because it's easier to pronounce. Yeah. Interesting fact, when you go from Rajiv to Raj, it changes the meaning changes from lotus, which is what my name means, to rule, which is not what my name means. As an aside, I have to say, you have no idea how much pride I feel when our two boys pronounce their names that reflect their heritage perfectly, and even go the extra mile of correcting others who mispronounce their names. But as a person of color in the academy, I think you're aware of how few people there are who look like you. Throughout my undergraduate and graduate teaching career, I didn't have a single instructor of color. So I'm grateful to be here, very grateful to be here, as my free writing alluded to. As an instructor of color, you serve, you hold your tongue, you're tokenized, you develop a thicker skin, hopefully without developing a harder heart. And you slowly accumulate what social psychologists refer to as idiosyncrasy credits. Essentially, this is enough time, service, and sweat so that your colleagues give you the benefit of doubt, so that you can acceptably deviate from group expectations. I'm an acceptable deviant. If you challenge systems or you speak up too soon, you will quickly see that words such as collegiality and civility are weaponized against you. And it's such a fine line, it may as well be a razor's edge. But you see how much your presence in the classroom, in the academy, means to students who look like you. So you keep up. Of course, if you're in this for justice, you are in this for the long game. And when you see that progress takes place, when you see allies speak up, when you see students thrive, when you see community build, it gives you hope. So, step outside of your comfort zone, work from empathy, work for equity, battle the academy, love teaching, and resist. Don't leave it for the marginalized to always have to advocate for themselves. Wield your privilege and resist. Engage in self-care and resist. I'm fiercely optimistic about what is possible, in part because of you and the spirit that you represent. As Arundhati writes, another world is not only possible, she is on her way. On a quiet day, I can hear her breathing. Now, over the last 40 minutes or so, you've sketched two icons. I'm going to ask you to go a bit further now. So grab your index card, and if you wouldn't mind, stand up. Where you're standing right now, but where you're seated, you don't have to go further, but stand up. We're going to try something different now. This is your challenge. I've done this before. So here's what I want to challenge you to do. You're going to do this individually. Everybody else is working on their own movement, so nobody's looking at you. They're too petrified about what they're on. Take the first icon, the one that represents stepping outside of your comfort zone, and look at it. And what I want you to do is come up with a movement that will last 4 slow counts. And I mean 1, 2, 3, 4. That essentially translates the thought that you've already translated onto paper. You're going to translate that to movement. It can be very simple. It can be the movement of one hand or 2 hands, or if you want, bending of your knee, as radical as that might be. Use your head if you want. It's entirely up to you. Keep it as simple as you want. But 4 counts slow. And you're going to have 30 seconds to come up with this, starting now. Think about it, play with it, come up with a simple movement for 30 seconds. Okay, most people have stopped moving, so I'm going to assume you've come up with something. Excellent. Now flip it over, and you're going to do the same thing for your second icon. This is all individual. The second icon, again, is about resistance, right? Compassion as an act of resistance. So for me, it might be something like this. Right? Whatever you want. A few more seconds. How are we doing? Not bad. Good. You're looking very confident. This is good. All right, so this is what we're going to do. We're going to do it all together. First, I'm going to count us down. The way I count you down with dance is I say 5, 6, 7, 8, and we go immediately to 1. What's going to happen is at the count of 1, you're going to enact your first movement. But you're not just going to do it once, you're going to do it twice. So twice in a row. So if it's, for example, this, you're going to do 1, 2, 3, 4, and again 1, 2, 3, 4. Does that make sense? Yeah. All right, good. Let's give that a shot. 5, 6, 7, 8. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Lovely. Well done. Give yourselves a hand. That's beautiful. I love it. All right. Same thing for your second movement now. Right? You know what your second movement is? Again, I'll count you down. You don't know what your second movement is? Improvise. Or, you know, in the spirit of open education, reuse, revise. Here we go. 5, 6, 7, 8. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Beautiful. Feeling good? Next step. We'll go step by step by step. We're going to stitch them together. So you're going to do your first movement twice in a row, immediately followed by your second movement twice in a row, which in dance gives you 2 bars. That's all you need to do. Are you ready? Again, don't forget the stitch. 5, 6, 7, 8. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And second movement. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Beautiful. Well done. All right. We're almost there. We're really close. Now, that's mostly what you will have to do. I'm going to go back here. There's a little more light. Now you don't have to come up with anything else. You're done. All I need you to do is copy me. Feet together. 45-degree angle, facing, well, there. Excellent. Now I'm going to do the mirror image, so you're going to use your right hand. Palm out. Okay, 4 counts, raising your hand. 1, 2, 3, 4. And keep your eyes following your palm, so you're going to look up at this point. 4 counts going back down. 5, 6, 7, 8. Beautiful. One more time up. 1, 2, 3, 4. Now hold on. The second time you put your hand down, again 4 counts. There's only one minor change, which is you're going to take your left leg and stick it out. So it's 5, 6, 7, 8. That's the only change. Let's do it together. Ready? Hold on. 5, 6, 7, 8. 1, 2, 3, 4. And down. 6, 7, 8. Up again. 1, 2, 3, 4. Don't forget your leg. 5, 6, 7. You guys are naturals. Simple, right? 8 more counts and we're done. Promise you. Promise. Right. So at the end of this, you know what? I'm going to simplify this for you. Let's just take the first bar we did and loop it. Right? So the thing you're doing, up and down and up and down, you're going to do it a second time. Up and down, up and down. That's all you need to do. Okay? You comfortable with the idea? Now, as soon as we finish that, because we're starting with this all together, everybody together. Up, down, up, down, up, down, up, down. 4 times effectively. And at the end of all of that, everyone standing in the first row are immediately going to go into their 2 movements. So the first movement, repeated, then the second movement, repeated. Everybody else can sit. As soon as the first row finishes, the second row will get up. Now, yes, good question. Martha's asking, you are doing your movement twice. So when it comes to, after we finish the whole thing together at the introduction, first row, you're doing your first movement twice, your second movement twice, and you sit down. The second row, you need to be ready to go on the count of 1, following their 2 bars, if that makes sense. I will be down here telling you when to get up, so don't worry about that. Second row finishes, third row comes up, third row goes down, and so on. We're going to go slowly to the back of the room, and hopefully nobody leaves. Anyway. We'll go right to the back, okay? And once we reach the back row, which is the 9th row of seats, so people standing in the back, join the 9th row of seats, okay? Then we're going to have 8 counts to catch our breaths, and all we're going to do is repeat what we did at the beginning, very simple thing. I will be doing it at the front once again. We'll do that together, and that will take us through the song. Are you ready? Where is the song? This is the song. Jessica, if you wouldn't mind. This is Stanley Clark's Justice's Groove. You ready? Don't forget, we're going to start together. And I want you to feel the music. You can allow yourself to move. Are you ready? Here we go. Hands going up. Slowly. 5, 6, 7. Go. 1, 2, 3, 4. And down. 6. Make it slow. Beautiful. And your leg out. Ready? First group. Here we go. Start. First row. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Second movement. 1, 2, 3, 4, 6, 7. Start. 1, 2, 3, 4. Repeat. 6, 7, 8. Second movement. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Go. 1. And repeat. 2. And repeat. Go. 1. And repeat. 2. And repeat. 6. Next row. Go. 1, 2. Repeat. Repeat. 6, 7. Go. 1. And repeat. Next row. 6, 7. Go. 1, 2, 3, 4. And repeat. 6, 7, 8, 2. And repeat. Next row. 7. Go. 1, 2, 3, 4. And repeat. 6, 7. Second movement. And repeat. Next row. Go. 1, 2, 3, 4. And repeat. 6, 7, 8. Second movement. 2, 3, 4. And repeat. 6, 7, 8. Everybody stand up. You ready? Together. Now, 1. You're so beautiful. Thank you. I love that that song's called Justice's Groove, and I know I've taken you beyond the time I was supposed to go, but I have 4 more minutes. Is that okay, Sean? Alright. Because if you're okay with it, I'd like to finish with one more song. And this one is another song which you're likely familiar with, but in this case, some of the words are changed to honor some of the wonderful human beings who are serving as instructors at DPL. Hope you like it. Clap anyway, even if you don't. By the way, as with so much of academic work, there's some invisible labor taking place. And as is often the case, it is a partner, my wife Sarita, who's changing the slides while I'm Alright, so again, I'm new to this, but we'll give it a shot, right? Okay, why not pick a hard song? Someday I wish upon a shore where critical consciousness alerts me, where writing pushes community to deeper meaning and beauty. That's where you'll find me, oh, somewhere. Heavens, that's a hard one. Over the rainbow, agency is considered when we use digital pedagogy. Someday I wish upon a star, wake up where the grades are far discovery, high above assessment trees. That's where you'll find Jessie, somewhere over the rainbow. Opened minds and the boundaries we push on. Why, oh, why can't I? Well, I see teachers dream and students too. I'll watch them fight for me and you, and I think to myself, what a wonderful world. Well, I hear Thank you very much. I'm sorry if I'm going over time, but hopefully that was fun. And hopefully you'll get to stick around for the reception as well.
I have no words.
You want a song, actually?
That was tremendous. Thank you so much, Rajiv. That was just amazing. So I do. If there's, we have time for question and answer if Rajiv's up for it.
As long as you sing your question.
As long as you sing your question. No, but yeah. So we have time to have some question and answer if you would like. So if Rajiv wants to stay up on the stage, we can do some question and answer if you'd like to. You might want to use that mic so we can run this mic around. That'd be great.
By the way, as we're waiting for the first question, please give a massive round of applause to Jessica Daly in the back in the sound booth. She's been amazing. Should have put up with a lot.
So questions or comments, both are welcome.
For a comment, I thought it was lovely.
Mic coming.
Just a comment.
Sure.
I thought it was lovely. And I just expected like dance.
Sorry, I just want to make sure we use the mic.
My
Thank you.
comment is just that I thought it was lovely, and I didn't expect to dance, and that was a beautiful surprise. So it was a lovely talk.
Thank you very much. And I can't wait to talk to you more since you're from Youngstown as well. So I'll find you in the reception, I hope.
Just, you reflected on an instructor who had a massive influence on you, and then a supervisor who was reluctantly supportive of you getting into teaching. Do you see that changing? And had, from the time you were in your PhD to now, do you see changes?
Yeah, I do. I mean, I really do. I see changes in terms of structural support, but some of it is coming from funny places. I think some of it is coming from the realization that the career that we are preparing our graduates for is vanishing. And so you have to think a little more widely. You have to think more openly if you're actually going to support your student success, whether that is a teaching career, which may mean much more to them than a research career, or working in industry or something else. So I think I've seen a growing recognition in that space. So, and I've also, as I said, seen changes in terms of the amount of supports available to people. So it's not that it's universal, it's not that it's permeated the culture of every department, of every institution, but it's enough that there are people who care about the things that we do, who are now slowly moving from the margins into positions where they can actually do something about it. You know, when you have administrators like Amy Collier and Jesse Stommel, this gives you hope. But it's a struggle. I think it's still, the system is not designed to encourage it. And so it's still individual actors who are stretching and making things possible. I'd like to see much more structural, systemic change in support of that kind of mindset. But yes, I'm seeing some change. Thank you. David.
That was one of the gutsiest things. Actually, is the gutsiest thing I've ever seen done live. That was fantastic.
Thank you. I need to work on those chords.
I wonder if you're willing, if you could talk to us a little bit about the self-talk that led to you doing what you did today. Because for me as an educator, trying to do the things that you're talking about, that internal voice is one that I always struggle with. It's one that I'm always confronting. And I just wonder if you'd take a second to talk to us about it.
Yeah,
I know it's a tough question, but...
No, actually, I thought about it quite a bit, so it's not that tough. But, well, one is... So, open education is where I do most of my work, and I talk about it a lot. And I think probably for some people too much. But I'm always... what I'm really interested in doing is serving the audience, the institution, the faculty, the students. And so if they need me to go in and give an introductory talk about OER and light some fires, I'm really happy to do that. I will never say no to that for that reason. But that also means that the more you if Jesse is only known for ungrading, and he isn't, eventually he'll reach a point where the invitations are like, can you do that? Amy with not yetness, or Jess with her work at the IDRC. So I think in some sense this for me is a really wonderful space because A, it has people who I know and I trust, and even if I don't know you, I trust you. There's a lot of self-selection into this community, and there's a lot of attraction of people with similar values into this community. So if I'm going to be experimental, if I'm going to be personal, it has to be in a space where I feel comfortable, where I have some trust that if I'm going to fail, if I can't manage the chords that I learned 3 days ago in one case, in the heat of the moment, it's going to be okay. I'm not going to be severely judged because of the community. But there's also, I think, a degree of, I believe a lot in openness in education, but I don't believe it's a panacea. And I believe it comes with caveats, and I believe it needs to come with criticality. And there's a vulnerability of practicing openness that I think you can't overlook. And so I think it's important to try and do things as they are occurring. So you can see the mistakes, you can see me learning from my mistakes, and you can see the honesty in there, hopefully. So I think the transparency of that is what I'm trying to model, but if I'm going to model it, has to be in a group like this. But yeah, and then of course, reaching out to Shauna, would you mind if I could do something unusual? It's fine. I didn't even ask them if I could modify the DPL logo. I just said, oh, by the way, like 20 minutes before the talk, I was like, oh, by the way, I hope you don't mind. That's what I did. But I think it's partly about you guys, and then it's also, I think, the honesty of openness. It's sort of similar to with e-portfolios. You don't just want to see the perfect essay and the perfect products. You want to see who the person is, and with openness, with writing and thinking and working your way through your writing and your thinking, to do it in the openness, to do it honestly. I think that makes it easier for students to practice it if you practice that vulnerability as well. But yeah, thanks for asking.
So there's
Thanks, sir.
Hello.
Yes.
So there's a little suggestion there that there's something that can happen in a space like this, or a space like your classroom, a space where you can create the opportunity for risk. Can you talk a little bit about how you see us as a community, and I don't mean us in this room as a community, I think us as a community of educators, how we can expand that so that people can take risks when they are still adjunct. I was also an adjunct for many, many years, and I did not take the same risks then as I do now. How do we create a larger space that allows more opportunity for those people to take risks?
It's hard. I mean, obviously, institutions will vary quite a bit. I'm seeing some institutions that are making a real effort to be inclusive in that regard. So, for example, I remember when I was an adjunct at one institution, I really wanted to serve on some committees, and I was told, no, you can't do that as a contingent faculty member, only regular faculty members can do that. And I've seen that institution change their approach. I'm seeing at my institution adjunct faculty represented on committees that make really important decisions that affect teaching and learning, professional development opportunities that are really given to adjunct faculty as well. I mean, my open education working group is also represented in that sense. But in terms of risk, it's really hard. I think you have to think about what you want, and with if I'm looking eventually, what is the culture of the institution that I want to grow, that I want to support? And there's a degree of, I want people to feel like they are free to experiment without feeling what the consequences of failure will be like. Right? You can't support innovation without supporting risk, without supporting failure. It's necessary. But the trouble is, right now, even if everyone risks in the same way, the consequences are not the same. Because for adjuncts, the consequences are much higher. So I think foregrounding that expertise, looking for those ways in which you can make those structural changes. It is a difficult thing, especially with, in some places, adjunctification now a majority of faculty, for example. And so if you're dealing with an institution that's, let's say, an urban campus, it's a commuter campus for students, it's also now a commuter campus for faculty. We want you at our meetings. We're not expecting you to serve like crazy when you're working at 3 institutions, for example. That's something I was asked to do. I wouldn't want to ask that of somebody else. But I think we're really in a very strange time with the level of contingent labor that we do have. And so I often talk about student precarity, but it's the precariat teaching the precarious. And so talking about innovation and risk in that sense, unless it's structural, I think again it's not going to gain traction. So I think it does require some vision, some courage. It requires support. requires, it's easier, I don't know if it requires, it's certainly helpful if faculty who are not contingent serve as advocates as well, making sure that those voices are included. It helps when you're on hiring committees and you're looking at applications and there are adjunct faculty who have done incredibly innovative things, who may not have the kind of record of service you would want, because again, they're stringing together 3 jobs, so where is the time for being on 5 committees? So I think it takes that level of understanding and support. Faculty, yes. Administration, yes. But I think it's really hard. I don't know. I'm open to your suggestions. And I have to say, one of the things, over the last year, I've moved from a faculty role to an administrative role. And I don't have my badge on me, but I felt like there's sort of a light side and a dark side, and I hate that reference to administration. I really, really despise that reference, because I want no part of anything that's described as the dark side. I think there's a lot of lightness in the dark side. There's occasionally darkness in the light side, if you want to look at it that way. But I think we really need to look at what we want to achieve. And there's people with sparks on both sides of that divide that really need to work together.
This is more of a statement, I guess, than a question. As an adjunct, one of the challenges I see when being asked to be on committees is compensation. And I think that is, in some ways, the elephant in the room. For anybody that's asking adjuncts to be on committees, we need people that are administrators and tenure track that are actually finding money in the budget to pay the adjuncts. Like, inviting adjuncts to professional development does nothing if they're not getting paid to do it, because everyone else sitting at the table is, and you're not on equal ground.
That's a really great point. But also, there may be, I think that's a really good point. There may be the other ideas that people in the group also have from their institutions, things they've tried.
It's fascinating to me that people often struggle to get adjuncts funding to come to events like this, but truthfully, an adjunct should not only get funds to come to the event, they should actually get a stipend for attending. We should not have adjuncts doing what is essentially required job training for less than free, because it's labor. We have time for one more question. Does anyone else? This one does have to be in the form of a song. Which I'm kidding, but if someone sings their question, I would be delighted.
I'll close with a question for you. In 30 seconds, what's one thing we can do when we go home? I forgot to time you.
5, 6, 7.
Reflect on all of the things that you should be grateful for and express that gratitude.
Fantastic. Thank you. Thank you very much. Okay, so we do have a reception that follows this. We've got some appetizers that are going to come out here. We do have a bar. Everyone, if you don't know her already, this is Lena Patterson of eCampus Ontario. She's the one holding the drink tickets. So everyone's going to get to know Lena really quickly. So we have a drink tickets for everyone. If you get your one drink ticket, and then you have access to the bar. And then after that, I think we can do cash. So yeah, so please just enjoy. If you feel like moving chairs out of the way so there's more room to sort of like mingle and that sort of thing, please feel free.